I am fresh out of the bed, as you can see, at 5 a.m. to bring you this major Danny Masterson update. Probably one of the last updates that we'll get on Danny Masterson, and I'll explain why that is in a little bit. But first, so if you watched my last update video on Danny Masterson, you know the update at that time was that he had been taken off of that medical bed that he had been held on for 10 days. He was back in his usual cell block. He was not coming out of his cell. He was refusing to leave his cell. He wasn't going to get his food, his breakfast, his lunch, refusing to eat, basically, not leaving his cell for any reason. Because he had heard not only about the hit that the GBG, Gay Boy Gangsters, had out on him, we also talked about in this last update that several inmates who are gang members, various gangs, on that Corcoran prison yard have contraband cell phones and are seeing these update videos. They're seeing the coverage on YouTube of Danny Masterson's situation in prison. They're seeing that we all know that the GBG has a hit out on him. They're trying to get to him. And so several more gangs put out a hit on Danny Masterson. So he found all this out. Basically, everybody from several different directions is trying to come at him, and he is refusing to leave his cell. That was the last update. Now, if you look up Danny Masterson, and thanks to one of you for giving me this tip that I was able to look into and caused us to further investigate, me, JD, everybody, to get this huge update on why did this happen. What happened? Danny Masterson has been moved from Corcoran Prison Yard to the California Men's Colony. Now, this prison is a minimum security to a medium security. So how is an inmate, and why is an inmate like Danny Masterson, who is sentenced to basically life in prison and should, especially this soon into his prison sentence, be at a maximum security prison yard, how does he end up there? Well, something pretty extreme has to happen. And something extreme did happen. So because Danny Masterson was not coming out of his cell, he wasn't eating, he might be starving. Of course, the staff is going to get concerned, and two corrections officers there came to his cell to pull him out and escort him up front. They don't know if this was to go get his food. They're just going to go with him and escort him to the kitchen to get his food so that he can start eating again, or if they were going to possibly take him to the medical portion of the prison to have someone talk to him and just kind of like make sure everything's okay there mentally, make sure he's not trying to harm himself again or starve himself here. One of those two possibilities. But they were escorting him from his cell block up front. Now, while they're taking him down these long corridors, these long hallways, two members of a gang called the BBCs. Now, I know what you're thinking, the BBCs. It's actually the opposite of what you're probably thinking. This is a white gang. These are apparently dropouts from the Aryan Brotherhood who formed their own gang called the BBCs, the Brothers by Choice. Okay, and they're the real deal. They're pretty serious. They're legit. They're very violent. Okay, two of these guys ran up on Danny Masterson while he had two corrections officers escorting him, started beating the crap out of him right in front of these officers. And apparently they beat the crap out of him for as much time as it took for the officers to get on their walkie-talkies and call for backup to help them gain control of that situation. So I imagine it was probably a good bit of time. Now, this attack wasn't enough for Danny to be brought to an outside medical facility. They do have medical facilities inside of prisons. But when it gets real serious, like if he got really just poked up bad and he's just bleeding out, he's bleeding internally and just gets really messed up, they'll either take him or have a life flight, which is a helicopter, take him to an outside legitimate hospital. That didn't happen, so I'm assuming the attack, I'm sure it was bad. I'm sure if we could see him right now, he may be unrecognizable. But I'm assuming that no weapons were used, no homemade prison knives or anything, because if there had been those for the amount of time that he was probably getting attacked, I'm guessing he would have needed to go to the hospital. So I'm guessing it was just hands, just good old-fashioned beatdown. So if you're looking for who gets credit, give it to the BBCs, the Brothers by Choice, those two fellas who are probably I would almost guarantee now on solitary confinement in lockup for doing that. I mean, and they already knew that's what's going to happen, but they're committed to the hit that's put out on his head, the green light on his head. So I'm sure they're sitting in lockup just fine with what they did, and they'll probably be rewarded for what they did when they come out of lockup. Now, as for Danny, he's been moved to a much safer yard. That doesn't mean it's just completely safe and not a hair on his little head will ever be damaged or touched again. I mean, prison is dangerous. Any yard you're talking about, I mean, things can always change depending on who's there. It's like JD has mentioned. I mean, the kind of guys on this yard, there's plenty of gang dropouts. I mean, these are guys who are still violent, still dangerous. They just aren't in the gang they were in anymore, but they're still the same person that they've always been. You know, you're still surrounded by dangerous people, and so stuff is much less likely to happen on these kinds of yards, but it can definitely still happen. But I would say overall, he's still much safer here than where he was. Now, again, there you have it. I mean, and this is probably going to be one of the last updates we get from an inside source on Danny Masterson, unless we can find one on this California men's colony who's able to communicate with us with a contraband cell phone. Because I mean, now you know, how are we going to get these updates? The guy who was in there giving them is at Corcoran prison yard, so maybe somebody will reach out. Maybe, I don't know if I will be able to get in touch with somebody or if JD will, or maybe another person who's able to get an inside source there and continue getting updates on Danny Masterson. But for the near future, it looks like that's the end of this book. That's the end of the chapter. But Danny Masterson has been given his welcome to the neighborhood initiation as far as coming to prison goes. Now, also, I want to go ahead and say this. I will admit, when I first started covering this, when he was first getting found guilty and sentenced and sent to prison, and we didn't even know where he was going to go yet, I did say, hey, I don't think anything's going to happen to him. I think, in my opinion, he'll be fine. I think his money will keep him fine. I think he'll probably get extorted. He'll have to pay a lot of people off. But, hey, he's a cash cow. Why would you want to hurt him when you can just milk him for all his money? So, guess I was wrong. And I'll admit that, okay? Hey, listen, if there's ever something you want to be wrong about, I guess it's that someone who did what he did, who he did it to, gets a little bit of prison justice. But also shout out to JD DeLay. I believe he was the first one to report on this and get this update out there to everybody. So shout out to him. Big appreciation to him for just working with me on this throughout all these updates and just going back and forth, calling me calling him, just keeping open communication on this. So, hey, great guy, great channel, great content over there, JD DeLay. Go subscribe to him if you're not already. And as for you and me, thanks for watching. Thanks for being here. Subscribe if you're not already. I'll see you next time.